scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy should itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Now, let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. And greetings, this is Technocracy News and Trends. I'm Patrick Wood, the editor and founder of Technocracy News. Welcome to the program today. I've been warning for a long time about the China model of technocracy, that China was fully intent on exporting its technocracy to the rest of the world, mostly to countries who are more autocratic like they are. However, in Australia now, in a town in the northern part of Australia called Darwin, the China model is being adopted, basically hook, line, and sinker, for total social control. This is very disturbing, and it proves the point that China is not just satisfied with controlling its own citizens. It wants to export the technology and the principles so that other nations can do the same to theirs. This article starts out, Australia is preparing to debut its version of the Chinese regime's high-tech system for monitoring and controlling its citizens. The launch to take place in the northern city of Darwin will include systems to monitor people's activity via their cell phones. The new system is based on monitoring programs from Shenzhen, China, where the Chinese Communist Party is testing its social credit system. Officials on the Darwin City Council traveled to Shenzhen, according to NT News, to, quote, have a chance to see exactly how their smart technology works prior to being fully rolled out. In Darwin, they've already constructed, quote, poles fitted with speakers, cameras, and Wi-Fi. The object is to monitor people, obviously, their movements around the city included, the websites they visit, and what apps they use. The monitoring will be done mainly by artificial intelligence, but will alert authorities based on set triggers. Just as in China, the surveillance system is being branded as a smart city program. And while Australian officials claim its operations are benign, of course they do, right? They've announced its functions to monitor cell phone activity and virtual fences that will trigger alerts if people cross them. Now, pay attention to the term virtual fences. When a virtual fence has been set around a person or a group, that means that the digital net is looking at and scrutinizing their behavior, and anything that happens to indicate that that person wanders outside of the fence, it will send an alarm to a system so that they can be further monitored, like, what are they doing over there? This is a very dangerous precedent to set. Australia is not considered to be an autocratic country like many other countries are. But if China can sell this to Australia, anybody in Australia, that means they can probably sell it to anybody, anywhere, in any country, including the United States. I said for a long time, again, that China is exporting its draconian and dystopian system of social control. And I've said it's coming to America even as we speak right now. Programs are being implemented around America that are slowly closing the net around us. The next story is very disturbing, actually. It concerns 5G. A lot of people are concerned about 5G. The headline for this one is Health Warning: The Risks of 5G and Are They Worth Taking? There's been a lot of concern about the possible effects of 5G on humans. Nobody really knows. And in this case, this article explains just how little anybody knows about what 5G is up to. It says in recent months there's been a lot of talk about 5G. the next generation of wireless technology. 5G is being touted as a necessary step to the Internet of Things, a world in which our refrigerators alert us when we're low on milk, our babies' diapers tell us when they need to be changed, and Netflix is available everywhere all the time. But what we're not hearing is that evidence-based studies worldwide have clearly established the harmful effects of human exposure to pulsed radio frequency radiation from cell towers, cell phones, and other devices, and that 5G will make the problem exponentially worse. Most people believe that the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, of course, carefully assesses the health risks of these technologies before approving them. But in testimony taken by Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, the FCC admitted it has not conducted any safety studies on 5G whatsoever. Telecom lobbyists assure us that guidelines already in place are adequate to protect the public. Those safety guidelines, however, are based on a 1996 study of how much a cell phone heated the head of an adult-sized plastic mannequin. This is problematic for at least three reasons. Number one, living organisms consist of highly complex and interdependent cells and tissues, not plastic. Number two, those being exposed to radio frequency radiation include fetuses, children, plants, and wildlife, not just adult male humans. And three, the frequencies used in the mannequin study were far lower than the exposures associated with 5G. Well, this is the problem. The people that are pushing 5G have no concern whatsoever about health issues, and they're going to gloss over it just as fast as they possibly can to get it implemented. A paragraph down in the article then states, but former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler made it clear that the telecom-dominated FCC, this is a former FCC chairman, made it clear that the telecom-dominated FCC does not put health first. And he stated, I quote, "Stay out of the way of technological development," he said. "Unlike some countries, we do not believe we should spend the next couple of years studying. Turning innovators loose is far preferable to letting committee and regulators define the future. We won't wait for the standards," he said. In response to the questions about health concern, Mr. Wheeler said, "Talk to the medical people." Yeah, it's a good idea. So this is an article that is worth not only reading, but also keeping and sharing with your friends. Nobody has done the medical studies necessary to find out if 5G is really going to be a problem for humans. And furthermore, another thing that's never mentioned in this is that all the towers you see currently in place for 4G, and you see these little mushroom-type towers all over the place. In the Phoenix area, one of these towers appears every square mile already. That's about every 5,500 feet, something like that apart. And on the top of these poles, you'll see as many as a dozen, sometimes 24 transmitting devices that are owned by the various players, the AT&Ts and the T-Mobiles and other city-oriented services and stuff that have their own private networks. These are not going to be removed because 5G is installed. So 5G is another cumulative network being put on top of everything already in place, greatly increasing the amount of electromagnetic frequency across the entire community. This has also not been studied. So there's a lot of work to do. And a lot of people are concerned about this. That there haven't been any horror stories yet reported on 5G sicknesses, but that really isn't the point. The point is it should be tested before it's implemented. The last story that I want to talk about is one that I wrote myself, and I titled it by any other name, Globalism is Technocracy, Not Communism. And I'm going to read this article to you. It's relatively short, and there was an article that appeared in Eagle Forum, which is, of course, headed by the late Phyllis Schlafly. And yes, of course, Eagle Forum is still moving forward. An article is written by Dr. Ileana Johnson Poe, and it appeared in the Eagle Forum magazine and website. And the title of that article was Communism Making Comeback as Globalism. Now, since I know many, if not most of the people at Eagle Forum, I was challenged to answer this, in a nice way, of course, that communism is not the problem coming back as globalism. But Ileana makes a lot of good points, and she talks about many of the same things that we talk about. She said it's a brave new world, one in which radicals are elected to high office in a system more corrupt and more ignorant than ever imagined possible. The voters believe in the shiny illusions of socialist communist hell are racing to implementation. Well, Americans are not quite sure, she says, when the surge to communism finally planted its roots in the population at large and things began to change. Some argue it was the 1950s, others the 1960s. Over time, corrupt mainstream media and the progressive controlled education system brought us slowly but surely to today, when good people are overwhelmed by manufactured news and personal attacks meant to marginalize anyone who disagrees with the socialist agenda, while the entire system of liberty and justice for all is collapsing. She's right about that. The entire system of liberty and justice for all Americans is collapsing. So the article goes on and talks about Representative Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, which a lot of people are calling socialism, of course. And she talks a little bit about the United Nations as well. All these things are of great concern, but they're not communism. And it's important to understand the difference. And you can go to the article and read it and copy it and share it if you find it worthwhile to do so. I hope you do. I said in a feature article on Eagle Forum website, Dr. Ileana Pa cites Agenda 21 and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, concluding that the greatest threat to humanity is socialism, communism 2.0. First, let me plainly state that I have corresponded with Dr. Pa and have the utmost respect for her, and I do, as a matter of fact. She is very well studied and a worthy patriot, but in this case, she has fallen into the trap of identifying all of this as communism rather than technocracy. This is not unusual either, because we have been well conditioned that communism is the only choice to make when we need an enemy to blame for society's dysfunction. Further, having lived under communism for 20 years in her native Romania, she has every reason to point to communism as her enemy. Admittedly, technocracy and communism have some surface commonalities. For instance, they both manifest collectivism, and both are autocratic as far as the subjects are concerned. Technocracy is far worse, however, because it will result in a dystopian scientific dictatorship from which there will be no escape. Philosophically, technocracy is rooted in scientism that was originally expressed by the French philosopher Henri de Saint-Simon. Communism sprang from Karl Marx and his surrounds, different roots and different outcomes. In the 1930s, communists and technocrats hated each other. Calling a technocrat a communist or vice versa could easily spark a fistfight, and there were actually a few of those. There were a plethora of articles that appeared in the day's media where both sides shot barbs at each other for being totally screwed up. And I comment in parentheses, we can say today they were both screwed up, but I digress. Furthermore, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who teamed up with David Rockefeller to found the elitist Trilateral Commission in 1973, wrote in 1970 that Marxism was a necessary stepping stone to the final age, which he characterized as the technotronic era. This is still my analysis today. Today's communists are the useful idiots of technocracy, and they will be the first to be thrown under the bus if technocracy wins this battle. It was Brzezinski in 1986 who almost single-handedly brought China out of the Dark Ages and into the world stage. At the time, China was indeed a communist dictatorship, and a brutal one at that. Brzezinski promoted the Trilateral Commission's new international economic order, which we now recognize as warmed-over technocracy from the 1930s. By the year 2000, global academics were calling China a technocracy. The trappings of communism are still visible, but China is now managed with an iron fist by scientists and engineers who are using, quote, the science of social engineering that early technocrats crowed about in the 1930s. Today's China model, highly regarded by the global elite, is the pattern for the rest of the world, including the United States, I might add. In sum, the United Nations Sustainable Development Economic System, communism and socialism are predominantly political systems, by the way, is fundamentally identical to historic technocracy, which I thoroughly documented in my Technocracy series of books. It was spoon-fed to the United Nations by a prominent European member of the Trilateral Commission, Gro Harlem Brundtland, in a 1987 book called Our Common Future. The UN has declared on multiple occasions that its goal is to replace capitalism and free enterprise with sustainable development. Ocasio-Cortez is part of this plot to destabilize capitalism so that a Green New Deal, aka technocracy and sustainable development, can swoop in. I can agree with Dr. Pa that those who don't learn from history must repeat it, no matter how disastrous. In this case, however, it is critical to get an accurate view of history so that we know the enemy that we're fighting. In my view, it's technocracy, not communism. Now, that's enough to explain the issue in a high-altitude flyover. There are many other differences and reasons that technocracy is rising today at breakneck speed, and communism or socialism is being used to destabilize the system, the economic system, so that technocracy can thrive. I'll continue to support this position in the future and provide more evidence so that you can see the difference. The famous military general from China, General Sun Tzu, was the first to make the observation, you cannot defeat an enemy that you do not know. If the common enemy is presented as being communism and socialism, which it is today throughout all levels of society, including the president and including members of Congress, both Senate and House, they're saying that socialism is the issue. As long as we perceive that socialism is the enemy, we'll be fighting the wrong enemy, and we will not win. Not possibly. If the real enemy is technocracy, then technocracy is getting a complete free pass to do whatever the heck it wants to do in our country and around the world. And that is indeed exactly what's happening, as some recent articles have pointed out from Technocracy News and Trends. A good example of that is the $2 trillion infrastructure deal that just got struck between Senator Schumer and Representative Pelosi and President Trump. Arch enemies getting together for one thing they can agree on: rebuilding infrastructure with a massive, massive investment of $2 trillion and handing it over to a technocrat who happens to be running the Department of Transportation, and that would be Secretary Elaine Chao. These kinds of things are just unexplainable any other way. You have the push to implement 5G, which President Trump and the administration is just racing at breakneck speed to do, and yet the FCC itself is dominated by big tech, and they're completely ignoring the health benefits that will accrue to Americans that are forced to live in the system. There's many things like this that indicate technocracy is moving forward with no checks and balances whatsoever. Nobody's watching it. Nobody's pushing back on it. Nobody's blowing the whistle, except for us, of course. And I hope you'll join me to do so. It's critical that we understand the nature and the identity of the true enemy that we're fighting in the world, or else we will be conquered by it, and we'll be left wondering after it happens, where did that one come from? Well, now you know. I hope you can get a copy of my book, new book, Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, if you haven't read it. If you need more background, immediately go back to my book, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And if you have the desire to support my work financially, please head over to patreon.com/technocracy and make a pledge of any size. Even $1 a month is helpful. $2 is better. $5 is wonderful. You get my idea. I can't do this alone, folks. I need your help. I'll do everything I can to share the knowledge that I've accumulated over 45 years of research and study and writing with you and with the American people. We desperately need to wake up the American people at large to be able to reject technocracy again. About the only hope we have left at this point is that in the 1930s and early 40s, Americans did in fact reject technocracy. But the reason they did is because they finally saw it for what it was, and they understood it by name and by the names of the people who were promoting it. And they said no, not just no, but heck no. That leaves some hope for us today that if enough Americans wake up to this, we can reject it again. And I dare say we must, or we'll all be living in a scientific dictatorship with an electronic manacle, figuratively speaking, around our necks. I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. See you next time.